To get in the mood for the holidays, the mood for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And I want to take you back to my college philosophy class. What is the nature of humanity? And I was exposed to thinkers who, on a certain level spoke to me. The Enlightenment thinker says, you're born good. You're corrupted by society, but you're born good. And so therefore we try to counteract the societal corruptions. Locke said, no, you're born tabula rasa. You're born just utterly neutral. And then kind of how you're brought up and how you're educated, that will determine whether you're good or not good. Actually, they're a little bit different from each other. Christianity has a really different view of humanity. Christianity says we're born into sin based upon Adam's original sin. That's who we are. And the only redemption from sin is through belief in Jesus. And it may be that some combination of those three captures Judaism. So I remember being at Brandeis Camp Institute after my freshman year at UCLA, learning with Joseph Telushkin and Dennis Prager. And Telushkin and Prager did a class on human nature. And they said, Judaism has a pretty somber view of human nature. And I remember thinking, that's odd. That's at odds with what I learned in philosophy class. I actually never heard a sermon or a thought or had a class about it at synagogue. I had always kind of thought, we're born pretty neutral and our experiences shape us. And they started with a verse from Genesis. And the verse from Genesis says, the inclination of the human heart is towards evil from its youth. And that challenged me. I remember we all pushed back. Are we really evil from youth? I don't see it. There's so many good people. And I remember Joseph Telushkin said, have you been into a classroom of fourth graders? He says they can be so mean. And I remember thinking, no, they're so nice. They're such sweet little kids. And there's part of me that fought it. And then there's another part of me that as I have learned more and observed more, feel so pulled to a worldview that says, there is a part of us that can incline to evil. It's not destined, but it's there. And I need to understand that part. I need to understand the pulls towards wrongdoing. And I think what the high holidays say is look at those parts of yourself that are defined by that wrongdoing. It's a hard thing to do. And then it says, know that you can change. And it may be that message of Judaism that was instilled in my heart from the time I was a little kid, know you can change, kind of made me push back a little bit to the somber view of human nature. But now those two go together beautifully for me. There are parts of us that pull us to not be our best self. The Hebrew for that, by the way, is Yetzer Ra. Know that our Yetzer Ra is real. We also have a Yetzer Tov, a good inclination that can fight against that. And I think that unless you know Yetzer Ra a little bit, it's hard to know Yetzer Tov. It's hard to know how to develop it. So this week's portion is almost full of contrasts, where Moses feels so angry at what will be. You're going to revert to idolatry. You're going to go into other lands, and you're going to be pulled to what they do. You look at the first text I brought. They turned to the service of other gods and worshiped them. They were unfamiliar. They hadn't experienced them. And God got angry, and God uprooted them from their land. I don't want to deal so much today with divine punishment for wrongdoing, other than to say, amidst this view that, we are inclined towards wanting to do what everybody else is doing. And it's true. We are inclined to place idols, not just stone, but anything that we've turned into the divine, be it money, be it fame, be it a political point of view. We have so many idols that we worship these days. And if we're not aware of those idols, then they subsume us. There's another line in Talmud that really, really hits me. It says, the first time you do a chet, you do something wrong, you miss the mark, it's really hard, you feel a little bad. And then the second time you do it, a little easier. Third time you do it, you've become polished at it. And you know those kids who sometimes will tell fibs? By the time they've told their third or fourth, they're experts at it. Which is why in our home, one fib, that crossed the line. Your integrity matters. But to know that part of yourself that doesn't want to get in trouble, that wants things your way, for me, this is a look into ourselves in a deep, deep way. And know that the consequence, again, I don't know about the theology of God will punish you. I do know the theology of the next one. You will certainly perish. You won't endure on the soil. When we're driven by forgetting our uniqueness and our relationship with God, we are vulnerable to all kinds of things. And he totally believes, that this is what's going to happen. Even if you're exiled, for all of these things, he then says something that for me is beautiful. The third text there, eventually return to God. The assumption is both that we are so flawed, we inevitably sin and stray, and therefore we require future repentance and redemption, and it can happen. I like a philosophical system that recognizes our humanity and our propensities to turn and keeps the door open for us to change. Which is why the third point, radical embrace of free will, is so moving to me. I've shared with, not all of you have heard the story, but we commissioned a piece of art when I graduated rabbinical school. With all of our names in the middle, it looked like a ketub, and each of us then had a verse around. This was my verse. It's a verse that continues to move me. I've set before you life and death, blessing and curse. Choose life. And choose life, I'm interpreting here as making the right moral choices. There are a lot of other ways that you can interpret the line as well, which is why it's so attractive to me. But here's what we say about human nature. We have tendencies. Know the things where people's tendencies manifest themselves. That long list, that's a good thing to look at right now in the next few days. Anger, misuse of words, being judgmental. Where are those places where I tend to need to focus on, this is where I miss the mark, and know that I can behave differently all through this portion. Shuv, shuv, shuv. Tshuva is desirable and possible. And even when it says God will forsake you forever, a few lines later it says, and you can return to God and God will accept you. No matter how far we stray, we have the capacity to reorient our life. I brought you the Maimonides. You'll know that you've done it once you have the same situation. But the Maimonides that has come to my heart now is Maimonides that says, sometimes tshuva happens in a minute. I'm gonna stop gossiping. I kind of made that decision my freshman year of college when Prager and Telushkin taught us to think about the consequence of gossip. And I can't say I'm perfect at it, but it was pretty quick change. Some changes take long periods of time. They do. To really internalize hard messages that are foreign to our makeup and to our essence. Jonah is the man who had trouble changing. That to me stands in the way of tshuva, and the reason I brought you his story is because I want us to see the Jonah in each of us. So you know the story of Jonah. You know that God called him to go to Nineveh, and he, instead of going to Nineveh, went the opposite way onto the boat. You know that the storm came. The sailors tried to save him. He said, "Heave me overboard." Why is he running away? It's such a good story, because we don't really know. They heave him, the storm stops. He's swallowed by a big fish. Sadly, that's the only part of the story too many people know, because the most important part of the story is what happens next. He goes to Nineveh, and he says, 6-word prophecy, the shortest prophecy of all Tanakh. Everybody believes him. They fast, they change their ways, even the animals fast. Don't you think Jonah would be happy? Look, I was a successful prophet. But then, the only successful prophet, by the way, in all the Jewish Bible. Just me. He says, "Oh no, this is what I was worried about." And it reveals to us what he was worried about. You are El Rachum v'Chanun. You are gracious and compassionate. Oh, that reminds us of Leviticus 36:4. Right when Torah is given, God is described in the same words. But Exodus 34. In Exodus 34, it says, God, you hold people accountable for their wrongdoings. This is a God of justice, a God who punishes. And when Jonah's saying, this is what I worried about, you were El Rachum v'Chanun, no tzarches la'alafim, I worry that you nichem al ra'a. You renounce punishment for those who have done bad. Jonah is so steeped in the beliefs of his youth. God should be a punishing God. By the way, I sometimes would like a punishing God. I don't say that in humor. I think that sometimes justice demands retribution and punishment. I kind of get Jonah's resistance, but boy, do I love the God that leaves the door open for people to change. Boy, do I love the God who says, I will not hold you accountable for punishment. Note how the story of Jonah turns the story of Noah on its head. Noah, the evil people, were just punished. Jonah, they have a chance to change, and they do, and Jonah doesn't like it. That's the part of the story most people don't read. They think the reason we read this on Yom Kippur afternoon is because it's a story of how people repented. Chapter 4. He's upset. And he sits and he stands right above the city. And what is he doing? He's waiting for God to destroy them. Come on, God, a little smiting, a little punishment. He's upset. He doesn't want to accept that God's compassion now overrides justice. And he's waiting and waiting and waiting. And it doesn't happen. And then in like this dramatic line, he says, God, take my life. Again, I wonder how many people have read chapter 4. You got to read chapter 4. And God tries to help him understand. He makes a plant grow. It gives him shade. It saved him from discomfort. Jonah loved this plant. And the next day, God creates a worm that causes the plant to wither, brings an east wind. It's beating down on him. He's feeling faint. And he says, God, I want to die. And God gives the most withering of responses that ends the book. God said, you cared about the plant, which you did not work for, which you did not grow, which appeared overnight and perished overnight. Should I not care for Nineveh, the great city in which there are many more than 120,000 human beings who do not know between their right hand and their left hand, and many beasts? And the book ends, which for me is the best ending, because it's honest. Because it tells us in terms of our work now that it's hard to change. Like Jonah, we hold on to the way we think things should be, and we hold on to behaviors that have defined us, that have become almost unconscious. Jonah could not change. And I love that the book did not end with the happy ending of, and Jonah said, you're right, God. Of course you're going to forgive because you care about each and every person and they might not have really known. And yes, you are the God of all humanity. In other words, God's answers for why God has changed are compelling to me. And they actually drive me to feel compassion for those who we may be angry at. So what is my takeaway today? One is perspective, to see beyond our own story. So your LO work, my LO work, is to say, are there places where I need to see beyond my own story? I want that to make you uncomfortable. I want you to think of time, places, experiences, people who you're dug in about. By the way, it doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to change. Usually they don't, because people don't change. But how can I change? How can I change me? And maybe in changing me, it opens a door. So number one is seeing beyond our own personal suffering. Number two, and this for me is why I brought this story today, because I'm feeling this deeply and exploring how to best bring this out in a way that allows for change. At times of suffering, like the time we're in now, it can be difficult to maintain an awareness of what others are going through. At times of collective suffering and struggle, and I wrote it, a time such as now, when there's a rise in anti-Semitism, we feel vulnerable. We struggle to remain open and connected. And it's not just rise in anti-Semitism, just a rise in anger. It's hard to stay open. It's hard to be compassionate, concerned, and understanding, just as God wished Jonah did with the plant and the people of Nineveh. I want to connect to that part of myself and ask what that means. And number three, it's not easy to change. He doesn't respond. I think that this teaches that it's really hard to change ingrained behaviors. And the person who I got this idea from, Shuli Rubin Schwartz, who's the chancellor of the seminary, JTS, she writes, might his silence teach that we continue to reflect and mull things over? She imagines that down the line, he does change and that we can change. So I wanted to bring you Nitzavim, I wanted to bring you Jonah to stimulate our own thoughts in these days leading up to Rosh Hashanah. Thoughts, comments, reactions.
Well, some days now I've been given into doom, thoughts of doom. But it is a profound message that we can change. The mood of the country can change. It gives me hope, and our tradition is founded on hope.
Yes. I think that's the high holiday sermon this year. I really do. Just that sentence. Just that sentence. We can change, our nation can change.
I just wonder, can we find enough big whales to swallow up some of the those who don't see the need to change or question their own behavior?
Listen, the sermon of we can change leaves the tension of all of those who don't change, who clearly are causing such pain. And my sense is the story calls upon us to struggle with that, to try to feel a openness if we can, while also demanding justice and change. So all of those things are in the story, and it reminds us also that there are people unexpected who can be our partners in that change. The non-Jewish soldiers, sailors, they're the ones who are trying to save him. The captain and the king of Nineveh, both of whom are not Jewish, have this capacity to see the world in a different way. And might that emerge? Might that emerge? By the way, it's hard to imagine that sometimes. Who else? I threw a ton at you. There's got to be more.
Thank you.
That way people on Zoom here.
You know, the piece by of Maimonides, right, saying that the return is complete only when we face the same temptation and overcome it, and the sort of the balance or the antagonistic relationship between your own fear and the belief that you don't have to feel the fear, right? That change, you know, you don't have to, you know, you don't have to, you can overcome that temptation knowing that there is something different, better, beyond, although the fear of not doing that, what is beyond?
Right.
So.
And isn't that interesting how fear gets in the way of us even imagining that? Good. Anybody else?
At the beginning of your sermon, Rabbi, you mentioned punishment. And what's the purpose of punishment? Is it rehabilitation? Is it retribution?
Yeah.
It's an excellent book by a Stanford law professor years ago discussing that. And I think this story tells us that people are judged by their behaviors,
Right.
as opposed but to they're rigid and cannot change from their past behaviors.
Yeah.
That's retribution.
Right.
Rehabilitation is having the compassion and the ability to forgive once someone has changed,
Right.
turned. And so that's what that story is bringing.
Jonah is the prophet of retribution,
Right. So
and God is the God of compassion and forgiveness.
your behaviors might be bad, but you can be good.
That's right. And you might even be able to change Jonah. So hold on to these. By the way, when I give out study sheets, it's if you would want to take it home and continue to study and discuss and have it hopefully inspire, please do. Keep a little file, but if you don't, give them to Leslie and I will use them next door. And I will see you at Kiddush. Mazal Tov and thank you. Please also share happy birthday greetings with Marion and David Finkelstein, who are at the Power Hour and will also have beautiful birthday blessings. And see ya Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And at Mayan's Bat Mitzvah.
For real. Friends, we have Musaf, a chance to reflect on Rabbi's words as well as the whole experience of the morning. Indulge in a little extra time of quiet and holiness. The Chatzi Kaddish starts us off on page 184. Yitkada ve'yitkadash shemei Rabbah ve'alma divra kirutei ve'yamlich malchutei